good getting to meet you. I know we kind of just give everybody a little background. We chatted because I reached out to your company OVR, which we'll talk about a little bit.
Hmm.
And I'm in the process, still haven't been able to do it yet. It is what it is. You got to go through all these hoops to buy stuff at the Division II level, which is
Hmm.
good and bad at times. But I'm looking to get the velocity based devices that you guys sell. So I reached out to, I think I just put an inquiry on in the website, and I got back from a guy, one of your guys' employees and sales rep guy, and he's like, "Why don't you just reach out to Michael?" He didn't say anything to me about like what your role was or that you were like one of the founding people. He just said, "Why don't you reach out to Michael and talk to him?" And
Yeah.
so then I reached out to you, and then we chatted on the phone, and literally like I looked down and like an hour had gone by, and we had just been chatting on the phone, and I was like, shit. I was like, I had somewhere else I had to be. I was like, shit. I was like, we're gonna have to put this conversation on pause, and like let's set up a real conversation and talk about some stuff because like you were saying some stuff that I hadn't even really ever heard before, and mentioning some people that I hadn't heard before, which I did do a little research. I listened to a bunch of Randy Huntington podcasts.
Hmm.
I was actually uh, in the middle of starting yours on your Burn the Ladders podcast, which we're gonna talk about a little bit with that too, but with Ullman and Rolf Ullman, and we'll kind of talk about how they've kind of influenced you a little bit. But yeah, it's pretty cool because it's one of those where like I had not to be rude, but I had no interest in reaching out to you directly. I didn't know who you. I didn't know
Yeah.
that you were the same guy that did Westside versus the World or anything. When that guy sent me an email, I was like, just reach out to Michael, and I was like, all right, well, it's just Michael. And then I realized once we got talking that you know it's there's a little bit more to it than just that. So, well, I appreciate you being on here. That's a very long-winded intro, but just kind of, I guess, give everybody that's going to watch this a little bit of a background on just who you are and what you're doing now, and kind of, I guess, kind of how we got connected. I talked about, but why you're a part of OVR and just kind of everything that's got you to this point so far.
All right. So I'll try and make it short. I grew up in Florida. Um, my dad played sports his whole life. He coached me when I was young. My dad was a nut about strength training. And in the 90s, he learned about Westside and Louie, and we had a reverse hyper in the garage, probably the first one in Florida. At one point, we had like two monoliths in the garage, but neither one of us were power lifters. It was both. We were dudes who played football. I played football and track and field. I was the thrower all through high school. I made a sort of 90-degree turn just before college and decided I wasn't going to take any of my offers to play football. And instead, I was going to go to film school. Um, Through budget cutbacks and other things, I ended up finishing through a tiny program called media production. But I was still, like at heart, if you asked 90% of the people who had grown up around me, like I was an athlete probably first. Um, I'm a quite large person. I'm 6'3" with shoes on and 245, 250-ish pounds. That's about where I was coming out of high school. So I was a big sort of lumbering ogre in this field of media. And I moved out to LA, and so it stuck out. There was, like I'm from the South. I'm a big old body, so it's uh definitely a thing where like people are like, some sort of coach has approached this kid before and wanted to talk about strength or talk about playing for football or something else. I move out to LA. I start working on documentaries. um I edit a movie immediately called Forks Over Knives. Ends up being a really big project. But I was a super young kid, and I had no idea while I was working on it that it would be anything of note. And it's probably, by the numbers, that's still the biggest thing I've been a part of. But it wasn't really reflective of me at all. It was just, it was a thing that I worked on, and I was a hired gun. I then go on to work for the NFL Network, and end up working on a lot of like combine coverage stuff, like working on like Mike Mayock's show, and um, being in that building and in that position and having the background that I did with training. It was a weird thing where I understood the sport and I understood the, sort of the spectacle of it, why it's kind of done the way it is as far as a show concept. And I understood, how you prepared for those tests, how you trained, and what all of those tests were ultimately trying to show. And I felt like there weren't a whole lot of people who understood all of those things, even when you're literally talking about working on the combine itself. And this is way back in 2011, 12, 13. I leave there, go work on some other things, some TV. I work on briefly on the Bobby Bowden documentary, and I get approached about selling a reality show concept that was based on a story that I had told someone, which was just the story of Westside Barbell, or basically, I explained it as like, hey kid, why do you always wear a shirt? Why do you always wear this black hoodie that has a dog's testicles on the back? It was because I would edit in a big Westside hoodie. Um, but the fact that that story had stuck with someone for several years by the time they asked me about making a reality show concept around it told me a few things. Number one, that person they weren't a power lifter. They had no interest in strength sports at all. They just thought that was a fascinating story, and their whole job was finding people who told stories. And they thought that and putting those stories up on television. So they thought that not only was the story good enough to be on TV, but my rendition of the story was specifically what they were looking for. So that was a huge like confidence boost. And I thought about it and was like, well, I could get paid to essentially be this conduit between West Side and this production studio. And I might make like $5,000 to $10,000 over a couple months doing that. But in all likelihood, Louis would say no. And that would be it. It would just be like, that was, shot a shot that maybe I hadn't really, really considered yet, but it wouldn't have any probability at all of going in. So I thought, well, if the story is good enough that people who know nothing about lifting and nothing about strength sports are into it, and my telling of it is good enough to stack up with, working directors and writers and show creators, then what if I just took my time and made this into its own thing? So flash forward a number of years, West Side versus the World comes out. It does pretty well, hits Netflix, it, debuts in the top 5 as an independent film, debuts in the top 10 on iTunes and Amazon, as the only film with a budget under $200 million to do so on the week that it does. Um, and so it was literally like every other movie in the top 10 had a $200 million budget, and we were like number 7, and our budget was less than $130,000. So I do all that. I moved to Florida with the girl who is now my wife. Um, and I find myself back in Tallahassee, where I'm from, and I'm training with, just some people in my garage as I'm trying to essentially like getting, checks from the last movie and trying to consider like, what do I want to do now? Um, I wanted to sort of just reconnect and do something that felt a little more real. I had started another movie, another powerlifting documentary, and now this is like 2019. Someone asked me, would you want to come back and maybe help just show? I had done seminars all around the world, packaged with the movie, that would be kind of a screening of the movie and then a seminar on both the process of making the movie, but also conjugate training as a whole. And I'd gone across the US, Canada, Australia doing that throughout 2018, 2019. And so somebody just locally, someone that I knew from when I was young, asked, would you help our old high school? And it was just supposed to be like a 3-day thing that I would basically like write out a workout plan, help put the kids and the coaches through it for a few days, and then maybe come catch a game in the fall. And I showed up, and a few kids showed up, about 8 kids, but none of the coaches did. And so I put the kids through a workout the first day, and I went back and told my wife, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do this, uh, this is a mess. And she's like, are you going to go back tomorrow? And I was like, I also don't want to call this coach and say like, nah, I don't want to come back. So I was like, I'll come back and hopefully the coaches will show up. The coaches didn't show up. I don't think they liked the idea of bringing in like some sort of outside. I wasn't supposed to stay there. I was just supposed to do like a sort of hands-on training for a couple days. But by the end of the week, I went home and told my wife, like, this is what I want my job to be. I want to figure out a way to coach. And she said, well, we still got to make money. And I said, you know, I had some VBT at the time. I had some timing gates. I had a jump mat. And I was like, well, I have all this stuff from training, and I used it with the kids. The kids love it. But it's all really wonky, and I'm going to need more of it to deal with the scale of this team scenario. Um, and I started talking to some people that I knew, and one of what would go on to be one of my partners for OVR. We had just so happened to start talking about like other ideas. And I said, well, I have this concept for like a company based around filling a need that I think exists in the market for affordable, like testing and training tech. I was like, there's no reason why this stuff is this expensive. And beyond that, the customer service is terrible. Just these businesses are not operating sort of in a what I thought was a proper, like, professional manner, especially for the prices that they're asking for. I was like, some of these some of these products feel like, essentially science fair projects. Like they just don't feel finished. The interfaces, like, I was like, I think that there's a very large market here if you just kind of took the time and the due diligence and the care to put together something, worthwhile. So then shortly thereafter, I met our other co-founder, Adam, and he was, a brilliant engineer and a college baseball player and stuff. And so he had that context of like what using the products was like and what it should be like. And being a young athlete without a budget, like he felt that similar sort of like need and draw from just a different angle. So um, all of us were, former athletes. I was a coach. So we felt very like street level, sort of, the way that we were viewing the industry from like that consumer angle. Um, and we just sort of reverse engineered from there of like, you know, how do we make the thing that we want? Because if we want it, there's surely, I think with anything, it's like if you have a problem, you're not special. A million other people have the same problem. So if you start from solving something that is real for yourself, you're going to solve something that's real for a million other people. And if you can be valuable a million times over, then you're probably going to end up a millionaire. So that's kind of how I've always gone about things. So you know, that sort of winding road of being an athlete, working in media, sort of snaking back to sports media, um, and then circling all the way back to, taking that thing that I'd kind of taken for granted, which was the exposure to coaching and training through my dad, that had led me to like, I met Louie and the guys at Westside when I was 12. And, this is in the 90s before they were popular on the internet, before social media was a thing. So these were all just like little random sort of, at the time they felt like very random little factoids about me that as time went on, they sort of grew and branched together. Um, and I just sort of saw an angle, and now that was 2019 when I first talked to the team about going into to train with them. 2020 more when I started to actually get in the gym with them right before COVID. Um, I've been at a different school since late 2021, I believe. Um, and now I've had multiple state champions, state record holders, and nearly 90 kids signed to college. So I think I'm hovering at around 86, 87. Um, but yeah, so it just, it kind of, out of nowhere conjured up an idea that largely and selfishly kind of put me in a place where my role in my job is talking to coaches. And yeah, it's probably easier just to say talk to Michael than explain all of that.
Yeah, no, honestly, that's awesome. Like that's a really cool like story. And honestly, you told it like you're good at telling stories. Like you've done that before. So it's one of those things, I guess, a couple things. Yeah. I mean, the fact that you were able to go and meet Louie and those guys when you were 12 years old, I mean, that's something that even back then you probably didn't realize it, but like, yeah, it's something that most people would, you take for granted as a 12-year-old, but people now, especially with Louie being gone, like that's something that's like a very like crazy, like surreal kind of opportunity. What,
Hmm.
did your dad know? And I might have asked you this when we talked on the phone too. And I can't remember. Was he like in like? I know you said you guys weren't powerlifters, but did he know powerlifters? Like, how did that relationship between your dad and Westside become a thing?
It So it was my dad when he was young. My dad had a congenital back condition, which um, I I've never been diagnosed with it, but very likely I have the same issue. So, my dad when he was real young was told, like you'll never be able to play football, things like that. And he did, Canadian Air Force exercises and things, way back in the 60s and 70s to try and get into shape and position that he could play football. He ended up getting to, go to college and go to Princeton because of football. Um, and once he was, I say once he was done playing, but he played semi-pro until he was 37. He was a stockbroker by day and then just went out and played linebacker in the afternoons after the market closed. I come from sort of you know, good, healthy stock of relatively crazy people. Um, but and I say that lovingly. Yesterday was his birthday. Um, but so my dad sort of from there, he was always really into bodybuilding magazines, loved Arnold and sort of big beefy, action stars of the 80s and the sort of machismo of that whole scene. And he again having sort of this um, preclusion to this predisposition to have sort of back conditions, he was always like mindful of that. And one day while he was reading an article in some bodybuilding magazine, the bodybuilder just said something about, trying out the reverse hyper and that fixing everything. And so this is early to mid 90s, so there's no internet. There's no web browser yet, like we certainly didn't have our home computer with the internet for probably 5 or 6 more years. And so the way that you got things was you had to get like the magazine that had the ad. And so the magazine that he was told he had to get was Powerlifting USA. So he got a subscription to Powerlifting USA just in order to order the ad. Like, so you think about like he read one magazine over here, heard about a device, didn't know what it was really at all, ordered another magazine just so that he could see an ad, cut out the little ad and fill it out so you can mail it in to make an order. And the ad is just Louis standing next to the old style reverse hyper. It doesn't really tell you like how you use it, what it's for. It's probably a terrible ad. But um, my my dad had the money to kind of take a flyer on it and had the burning space in his garage gym to put it in there. So he orders it. Tape comes in. Again, this is like 94. It comes with a little VHS tape. He pops that in. There's a weird little nasally troll man talking about the machine, and my dad's like, all right, toss that. That dude's weird. But he keeps reading. Now he's got a whole subscription to this powerlifting magazine. And he's not really into powerlifting. All he'd been doing is reading bodybuilding stuff, but he wasn't a good bodybuilder. Like he had small biceps. He was relatively strong. He's always in good shape for his age and stuff, especially. He was super active. Um, but no one mistook him for a bodybuilder. Uh, and then he starts reading about powerlifting and you go back and you read through and it's like, uh, it's so and so's 12-week linear plan. so-and-so 6-week linear plan, their 8-week linear plan. And it's just linear plan, linear plan, linear plan, maybe some form and technique stuff. And then Louis would have his segments. He'd always have his articles, and his articles are, breaking down different methods. And it's, again, my dad had gone to Princeton. He's relatively intellectual. So he's like, it was just stimulating content, and he became fascinated by it. We started trying it. He bought boards and he bought chains, and he starts collecting special bars, and Louis would put his number in the magazines back then. And so eventually, like, my dad called him a few times, and then I start doing track and field, and I end up qualifying for nationals in the shot put. And nationals that year in 1999 was held in Cleveland. And so my dad went, "Ooh, Cleveland, that's in Ohio. It's got to be right next door to Westside." So he volunteers. My dad never travels. He volunteers to be the chaperone, one of the chaperones, as like 40 kids ride on a bus for a week and a half up to Cleveland. And we rent a car. The rest of the team goes to the track. I'm only competing one day. So the rest of the team goes to the track, and we drive down to Columbus. And he gets the permission to show up. And so we show up, and, he brings his gear and, his belt and stuff, and his Chuck Taylors. And we get out there, and, Louis comes out of the back, kind of scratching himself under his squat suit, and pulls his hand out after saying how his balls itched, and then shakes my hand. And, I'm just like, what is this environment? And like, someone calls CPS. So like, what has my dad brought me to? He said, we're going to a gym. This is not what a gym looks like to me. I'd seen commercial gyms, and, even our garage, which was dirty and dingy, and had big heavy weights and weird bars and stuff. I was like, nothing looks like this. It was that West Side with the black, strip mall windows and stuff. And I sat there on a bench while an injured Chuck Vogelpohl literally growled at me. And my dad, tried to hop into a speed, or I think into a max effort squat workout. And then later on in the week, maybe some sort of dynamic effort workout. But, my dad had some communication with them beforehand, but then stayed in relatively regular communication afterwards. During that trip, he asked Louis if he could pay Louis essentially to come down and do a seminar down in Florida, because he always heard about Louis doing these talks up in Ohio, but my dad doesn't like to travel. And it turns out Louis didn't like to travel either. So at the time, there was a relatively young Dave Tate who said, well, I do seminars and I talk about the same basic thing, and, I could come down. And so Dave Tate did some of his first elite FTS seminars, where they traveled like outside of the like Midwest, basically came down and did 3 seminars while I was in high school, 2000, 2001, and 2004, all in my dad's gym, which my dad's gym, it's important to note, was a garage with no AC in Florida. And they did these, I feel like they always did these seminars in August. So during, hurricane season and driving winds and just gross thick mosquitoes, and having to alternate between picking up the garage door to let some airflow in, and then putting it down because either rain is coming in or mosquitoes the size of bats are coming in. Yeah, so I just, and then the internet happened and social media happened, and I ended up in LA, and suddenly it's like this valuable connection that I have to this, group of sort of barrel-chested, miscreants in Ohio.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to do this, because it's like, even just the history, like, let alone if we ever if we get to talking about training today, just the history, and that's something like I'm extremely fascinated in. Like, I'm obviously, I mean, I don't know if you can tell here, I'm not the biggest guy. I'm like 5'7", 175 pounds, and it's one of those things. But I've always loved training. It's always been something that, even as a smaller person, if it wasn't for strength training, like, I never would have been able to be, nearly as competitive as what I was at sports. But I remember being in like middle school and reading like I was subscribed to Flex magazine. So like, you're getting like magazines with like Ronnie on the cover. Jay Cutler was kind of like my idol back in the day. Like I thought that if I just blended up my chicken breast into a smoothie and drank it, I was going to look just like Jay Cutler in 5 years. But, the funny thing about that is like, even back then, like I remember like their programs, they'd have like Jay Cutler's like 12-week program and all that. And honestly, I think a lot of that was literally just the magazine just regurgitated the same program and just put something like it really wasn't Jay Cutler's program. Like it might have a little bit of flair of what he does, but that stuff kind of cracks me up now looking back at it, because it was probably all the exact same stuff. They just, whoever was on the cover, they just called it their program that week or that month. And then like the thing you said about the ads, like now it's like we have all ad blockers on our phones and on our computers and on our emails. And your dad went out of his way to like get an ad. He subscribed to a magazine just for the sake of getting the advertisements. So I think that's kind of just one of those unique things where like kind of a timestamp in history of like how different things are then versus now, like the 90s versus now, or the 80s, I guess, even. But no, I mean, it's awesome because like I love the history. And, I was at I don't know if you're familiar with like the Sornex Summer Strong stuff that they do every year. I went to Summer Strong this year for the first time, and it was awesome. It was just an awesome way to like network and meet other coaches and just to hear from other people in the strength world. And like they have like a little museum in their gym, basically that like history of strength training stuff. And it's just a lot of it's like the old school like grip strength, like strongman type stuff, because that's what Pop Soren was like into. But it's one of those things where like you could almost make that same argument of like Westside's kind of the same thing. It's like a museum of training, and obviously the documentary goes into that, which is kind of going to be my follow-up question here. But yeah, it's awesome to hear that, because to me, like that's, everybody wants to talk about what's the new, and I like that too. I like getting into new stuff, and hopefully we have a chance to talk about that a little bit today, some new terminology and things. But man, it's really like a lot of the same stuff over and over and over again, like stuff that we're doing now, people were doing in the 60s, 70s, 80s, well before there was the internet and ways they had to call each other on the phone or send letters in the mail to each other or whatever. Getting into the film real quick, I feel like we could have a conversation, a 3-hour conversation or more, just about the film. And I told you last week, I rewatched it again. Again, it's just an awesome documentary. And I'm not just saying that because you're on here. It's awesome just because I love strength history. I love the sport of being strong. I guess what was kind of like the catalyst of that? Like what was maybe the thing that you were like, man, I want to do this. I know you said this, you told the story and the guy was like, man, that would actually make a really good documentary. Like what was kind of the catalyst that was really kind of like the final, like kick in the butt to you to be like, hey, let me actually like pursue this legitimately. And then how did you have to approach that with Louie? Cause like, I don't know Louie, so I don't want to sound like I do, but like as much as he seems like he's an open book, as you mentioned, kind of he also isn't like, he's not about a lot of fluff either, it seems like. So it's like, how do you kind of go to him and be like, hey, I want to make a documentary, but I don't want it to make it like cheesy or corny or like anything like that? Like, how did you sell that to him, I guess?
Well, so how it happened was I was working on a Bowden documentary, Bobby Bowden. And again, like I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. That's where I am now. I'm an FSU alum. The jerseys behind me and stuff, like I coach at a charter school that's run by Florida State, a public charter. Our colors are garnet and gold. So that's, I frame every time I've got a kid who does something, really incredible or special, or in the case of the jerseys that are in this room right now, for the most part, they're all region player of the years. So like this girl was an all region player of the year in flag football and got a flag football scholarship. This girl was a 2-time all region player of the year in volleyball and now is on the sand volleyball team for FSU. But so I have all these ties to Florida State and just the Tallahassee community in general. And I'm, super big about like where I'm from. But so I was working on that, and someone else that I knew, he had gotten funding finally for this. And sort of that's kind of how movies work, is like you have an idea. It's like, cool. It's a good idea. It's a great idea. Now you need all of these things to line up in order for this idea to become real. So the Bowden documentary had all lined up, and then some things had happened and it had kind of fallen apart and got put on the back burner. And then it was coming back to where it was starting to line up again. And um, simultaneous, like, I'm talking one day to my dad about it, and he's like, well, why not just do the thing on West Side? And so the catalyst really, and the sort of kick in the ass to get going with it really was my dad. My dad, without asking me or anything, he just called Louie one day. They were talking, and Louie didn't really remember like my dad from the trips in '99. That was the last time he had seen him. Um, but he knew that, like, okay, this is a name and a guy that I talk to every once in a while. I'm sure he needed reminding of. It's just a voice on a phone at that point, and like, oh yeah, you got a son who does this and that, okay, and it, it comes up of like, my dad basically says like, well, my son wants to make a movie on you, and we had talked about it and whatnot, but like, I'm actively preparing for another project, and my dad calls me. He's like, hey, guess what? Great news! You got a meeting with Louie. And I was like, when? And he told me it was late at night when he had told me, and he's like, 9 a.m. Now I'm in Los Angeles, and my dad's calling me late at night on West Coast time. And 9 a.m. means 6 a.m. my time. And I'm like, great. So I'm going to pitch this guy in a few hours, and I have not prepared at all. So I just sort of binge some content, and I stay up all night. And then at 9 o'clock, I get a call from Columbus, and it's Louie. And he's, hi, this is Louis Simmons. Hey, Louie, this is Michael Fahey. And he heard you want to make a movie on me. Yeah, actually, I guess what I want to, he goes, let me stop you there. No. And I was like, cool. 12 seconds in and I've been burned. Like, that's it. All right. Good job, team. And he said, no, but what would you want to do? And so I start telling him, and I basically lay out, like, well, what I would want to do is I want to tell this story because I think that you all are an important part of the development of strength and sport culture, and what you've built is so incredible. And, like, I especially respect and I understand, that the real proof of your system is that you did so much of this with just kids from Columbus. And, like, I knew that that was something that would kind of resonate with him because he talks all the time, or, he talked all the time. You'll notice I still like have a hard time talking about him in a past context. But I said, like, it's evident that, like, statistically there shouldn't be so much success from like one small community. Like, there's not just like, some super substance in the water where everyone in Columbus are a bunch of superheroes, like, there's as he would say, like, that's a system at play. And so we end up talking for like 45 minutes, and he says, well, it's been good talking to you again. No, but I'm going to hand the phone over. I want you to give your shirt size and your address to the woman that I'm going to put on the phone. So I give her my info, and I think, like, okay, that's it. And then 2 days later, a giant box arrives on my front step, and I open it up, and it's every DVD that they have on the shelf and every book. And I had told him at the time I'd lost a bunch of weight after college, so I'd gotten down to about 190 pounds, and I was running 5 to 7 miles a day, 5 times a week. I was really big into barefoot running, and I was really skinny and lean. And he had jokingly asked, like, how big I was, and like, how tall I was. And when I said 6'3" and 190, he was like, no, you need to be at least 308. You should be a super heavy. You need to at least make a 2XL tight. So he sends me all these 2XL shirts in a box full of books. And I go, okay, well, that wasn't a no, that was a challenge. So I read everything twice. I watch everything twice, and I call him back 2 weeks later. And he's excited that I called him back. And we talk for an hour. And he says no. He says, but give me a call in a few weeks. And a few weeks later, give him a call. And just every 2 to 3 weeks, we do a call, and they kept getting longer and longer until one day, this is probably by the fall. So we started talking in like July, early July and of 2014. And now it's like October 2014. And he we've been talking for like 3.5 hours. And I, for the first time, was like, hey, Louis, I got to go. Like, I don't have time to do this. And he's like, well, when are we going to talk again? And I could tell he was in a pretty good mood. Because he was right in the middle of explaining something to me. And we were just talking about training. Like, we talked very little about the actual process of making a movie. And I think the fact that I was so genuinely interested in the training was the thing that kind of sold him. And it's honestly like how I sell things now is, you can probably attest to. I just talk about application and training, and I want to nerd out about the use of things. But so I really had to like prove my, I guess, like good faith curiosity, and then finally I just said, like, listen, Louis, like, we're going to keep doing this, and I'm going to catch you one day. You're going to mess up, you're going to slip, and you're going to get too eager and too happy. I'm going to make you feel too good, and you're going to say yes. And I'm going to say, great. I'm going to get off the phone like George Costanza, get the answer you want, get off, end on a high note. And then it's going to take me a while. I'm going to have to get money together, and then I'm going to come out there to Columbus. We're going to shoot. I said, you've never had someone shoot a movie about you. And I've never shot a movie about Louis Simmons. I said, like, so I'm going to piss you off inadvertently, and you're going to probably kick me out, and I'm going to come back to you, like allow you some time. And then we're going to talk about what your boundaries are and what your updated boundaries are. And, like, it'll take time. Like, that's why this wouldn't work as a TV show where there's a tight schedule, but as a documentary, we can take time. And, like, if I get out there and you truly think that I'm, not good faithed or whatever, like, shut it all down. And he kind of chuckled and said, okay, like, this isn't my yes, but we'll just assume that at some point I'm going to say yes. And so then about a year later, I had the money. I went out to a little less than a year. I had the money. I went out and we started shooting. And yeah, through several stretches of, I'd be there for a few months. I'd leave for a few months. I'd come back. Because there's the very small sort of publishing that existed at the time about the story of Westside. And then there was sort of all the things that they couldn't tell you in the articles, and, all the politics of who still liked who, and who's, who, you had to one by one earn everybody's trust. But again, like, I had some rapport with Dave Tate. I I had that rapport with Louis, and then other people just kind of went off like, okay, well, I'm weary of this, but if Louis says you're good, then, he's more fickle than me. So I trust that if he says you're good, then you're good. And, it was at times walking on eggshells, but we slowly meandered through. We got it done. It came out, and, relatively happy with how it came out. Like, I don't feel ashamed or anything of the movie. There's certainly things looking back on it. I try not to have too much expectations of something like a documentary. And that's, to sort of get into like what I was saying to you about, like, when you interview someone for a documentary, you might have questions. Like, preparing yourself, not an issue, but their answer is the best answer is going to be the first time you confront them with having to put these answers together. And so you save that so that, like, you get that good take when they're on camera. In your case here, I've done 100 episodes about of other people's podcasts and a movie podcasts and stuff about the movie. But I just generally, I liked that idea of when you make a documentary, it is inherently collaborative. There's only so much you can prepare. It's mostly that you have to react to what is happening. And that probably dovetails into like how I train with, short waves, and, like, it takes me no time to write a program because I don't program. We surf a 3-week wave and, adjust as need be.
Right. Yeah, a couple things actually. So I wanted to go back to this. I forgot to mention this earlier. You mentioned the movie Forks Over Knives. It's kind of funny because like
Hmm.
when I was in like I don't know early in college, like I saw that movie and it's one of those where it definitely tricked me for like a year. I think I definitely kind of went into that whole like vegan vegetarian thing for like a year. So whatever role you had in it, that that's kind of the it was one of those. And again,
Yeah.
I mean tricked me kind of like in a joking sense where it made
Yeah.
me. I think what it really did was it made me really think about having a better connection with what I was eating. Like, and even now, like
Yeah.
I eat very healthy, and because of the fact that like I want to have a connection to the food that I'm eating. So a little bit of a side note, but
Hmm.
it's something that I thought was interesting. And
Yeah.
then the other thing that I think is interesting too, because of just how small of a world things are. Like obviously, you mentioned Bobby Bowden, and obviously he's a legend at Florida State. Well, you know where he was before Florida State, right? Like where he coached at before Florida State.
In West Virginia.
Yeah, he was at West Virginia. That's
Yeah.
I'm in Morgantown right now. I live in Morgantown.
There you
So
go.
I went to WVU for undergrad and grad school. And obviously Fairmont State, we're 30 minutes down the road from WVU. So it's one of those things where like he's a legend in Tallahassee and in all of Florida, but he's also a legend still
Yeah.
in West Virginia as well. So um, and a lot of like the heyday of West Virginia football was during the Bowden era, before he
Hmm.
went to Florida State. But then going back to the documentary, one of the things that really stood out to me that I don't know, like I'm not an expert on West Side, but I've definitely
Hmm.
tried to over the years do my fair share of just not only research of the gym and of the people itself, but obviously like conjugate training and I've been doing I don't want to say some form of it because there's only one form of it, but you know what I'm saying? Like I've been utilizing portions of it since literally probably shit, I don't know, probably 2015, something like that was
Hmm.
kind of when I was first introduced to it. So at least for the last, no, longer than that, probably 2013 or 14. So probably the last 12 years or so. Um, but the one thing that I found fascinating was just again, just all the little storylines and the little threads of things. Like I didn't know about like the falling out of, or at least as much of the falling out with like Chuck Vogelpool and like all
Hmm.
the new guys that were coming in. I didn't realize all that. I didn't realize the thing about Matt Dimmel like passing away with from I guess drug I think it was drug overdose, correct?
Hmm.
And then honestly, like I didn't realize like Brandon Lilly, like I've done the cube method before, and I've read that back a long time ago. Like I probably read that and did that like in 2014, 15, the cube method. I thought he wrote that book as a follow up to years and years and years of training at Westside. I didn't realize that he basically kind of got like quit or got kicked out after a year. Um, and then like
Hmm.
the women of Westside, like I feel like there could probably be a whole documentary just on them. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Oh yeah.
in your documentary, it's like a 15-minute segment because you have to fit everything in the time constraints. But it's like, man, like that could be a whole documentary in and of itself because like that's something that they're still head and shoulders above everybody else. And it's like in terms of just the strength of their women and stuff. So I guess one of
Hmm.
my questions with that would be is you mentioned like stories and getting approval and having to like kind of toe the line of like, is this an appropriate thing that I can ask? Can they tell me in it? How much do you feel like, especially when you think of like the documentary having a certain time constraint, how much was left out? Like how much was told to you that were like very interesting, like kind of not top secret,
Oh,
but secret stories and things like
there
that
was
that you
a,
didn't even get to put in?
yeah, there was a 7.5 hour cut.
Wow. Wow.
Like, um, it's not a good movie. So that like it's independently produced. So I could have done literally anything that I wanted with it.
Right.
Um, all Louis asked basically, he didn't want any responsibility for the creative role of it. In case it was bad, basically, he was like, I want to be able to say, like I had nothing to do with this. Um, but in the end, he was like, people say they like it, so um, he was complimentary in the end. But the yeah, there's a ton of, and a lot of it was again me just sort of exploiting the fact that like when I went to interview, say like Buddy Morris, I interviewed him for 3.5 hours, like and I hung out at his house for like 6 hours. Like we have hours of conversation, and I knew going in like if I use 30 seconds of his voice, that like the over under of how much he's going to be in there is probably 30 seconds.
Right.
Like I knew like he's not going to make it to 2 minutes of his voice.
Right.
Um, but I interviewed him. There's plenty of people that I interviewed for 3 hours that are not in the movie at all. some of which because, there's one person who, there we go. Sorry, I got a phone call there. There's one person who I interviewed for 3.5 hours, and they're not in the movie at all. And it basically comes down to like, they're not a primary source. Like every story that they had was hearsay, which is another thing, like in making the movie, like a lawyer had gone every single line in that movie, whether narration or dialogue. There's not a single thing in that movie that I don't have at least two people on camera, on record, attesting to. So it's, there's everything is done to a certain like journalistic standard of integrity. That's just the style of movie that I make. It's not, I don't make stuff like just to be salacious. It's there's a certain ethos and sort of point of education to it. So it's not like I didn't get to put anything in because someone like tied my hands of it. If anything isn't in, it's like ultimately there's some stuff that like I thought it would come off as more profound. I kind of wish, like I wish that I had set up like one legitimate regret with the movie is Louis's accident in 1991. And he says, like they severed my intercostal nerve. Like the severity of that accident, like because basically from 1991 on, he doesn't sleep for more than 45 minutes straight. He died in 2022. So for 31 years, he, essentially goes without like a full REM cycle, which is not a thing that like doctors or medicine, like that's an insane thing. And it kind of gets presented sort of so quickly, partly because like I didn't understand as I was making it until like much later on. And there's just so many things happening within the movie. Like you can't hit everything. You can't tell everything. So stuff has to get cut. A lot of the stuff like with the women, the women are so accomplished, but the women are largely accomplished. And like if you've, whenever you coach athletes, you kind of see this. Women are tend to be just like they get in, do what they're supposed to do, and get out. So they end up being far less dramatic.
There's less of a storyline there, and chaos.
Yeah, well, it's some of the emotional drama of everything. Like number one, that creates a human element that people can latch onto, but number two, it also creates it's like water cutting through a river or something, where it's like it creates a point where it funnels and causes everything after it to shift. Like there's the bands, the chains, like these sort of logical revelations that cause a shift in the training afterwards because of math. And then there's sort of the irrational nature of how humans and emotion play into things, and what you're juggling as a coach, and essentially like dealing with your life cycle as a coach and dealing with athletes who are dealing with their life cycle as athletes. And ultimately any sports movie at the end of the day comes down to like there's stories about mortality. There's stories about, how quickly life is running away from us, and you sort of grapple with like your own death before you die. That's what sports are all about, is a celebration of, the beauty and splendor of life, and also the like random and sometimes tragic or chaotic nature of death, but while you're still alive.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess, and I definitely want to get to some training stuff here. Is there a possibility of, I mean, I don't know now with Louis being gone, like, how that would kind of have to go down and kind of from a permission and all that standpoint, but is there a possibility of like a follow-up or anything else kind of, in terms of that? Cause I mean, that's the thing is like, especially with all all that content and just the storylines and things like that. Like that's my thing is like I finished the documentary, like I said last week again, and I was like, man, I could have watched a 10 episode Netflix series on that. Which I mean, I know, I know that's not what you set out to make, but it's like, it's almost like it kind of, it's like, man, I wish there was a little bit more. I wish there was more to watch. Just because, again, just not even just because it's Westside and Louie. For me, it's just because it's strength and conditioning history, and like that's something that I'm super like. I just love that. Like I love learning about that kind of stuff. Let alone like there's science tied into it with why they did certain things and what their methods were, and then there's obviously the records and the achievements that they've made, and then the storylines. But for me, it's if anything, it's a historical documentary. You know what I mean? So it's like documentary. I don't know why I said it like that. The historical documentary. So it's one of those things where, like, to me, like I would definitely be like interested in more content. So I don't know if that's something that you've thought about or not, or is possible.
Yeah, it kind of comes down to number one, like I don't have a lot of time right now.
Right.
I did shoot another full documentary that it's not a sequel or necessarily like a follow-up to Westside versus the World, but it is another powerlifting documentary. Dave Hoff is in that, Anthony Oliveira, a few other people. So there's some familiar faces and a lot of sort of familiar imagery and terminology. OVR kind of sprang up and got going very fast, and so that sort of necessitated taking over a lot of my attention. But so I do have another documentary that is nearly done and nearly ready to release that it will, I think, for a lot of people kind of scratch that itch. There's certainly ways to there's always, that's how LA is, or how the movie industry is. Like I'm not in LA anymore, but with the internet, all things are possible. There's definitely creative ways to package. Like at the end of the day, I'm still a producer. I can find a creative thread to pull a project together around any sort of resource, but the likelihood of it, the permissions would make it difficult, and there's some interesting like opportunities, certainly, like if you're a network exec or something, or a member of certain estates, like I could make the case, and I think that I could make the sale, but just right now that's not anything that is currently like planned upon.
I gotcha. I get that. I understand that. We'll say maybe there's still a little hope. We'll still a little chance.
Yeah.
So getting over to OVR, I guess, kind of just you mentioned it a little bit earlier, kind of how I guess it's you and two business partners, you said, that started it. I guess kind of give us, you mentioned about there being a niche for it, which again, as a Division II strength coach, like 1000%, like that, everything that you were talking about, kind of that. I hate to say it like this as a negative, because I think sometimes it's a positive, like kind of that poor man's strength coach. Like what can I afford? Like, how can we make it work? I'm like, I can't afford like to have one perch is more than my entire yearly budget. You know what I mean? So it's like, to me, it's like, yeah, having a perch is great at the Division I level, but like I get emails from perch all the time. And it's like, why are you even emailing me? Like you're literally one unit is more than my entire yearly budget. So it's one of those things where, like, I guess kind of like, essentially tell us like what you guys do, well, in kind of why you've been successful, like why you said it's kind of blown up, like at least what you think it's the main reasons are why you guys have been successful with these. How long have you guys been around? When did you guys start?
So again, I conceived everything in 2020. That's when we started meeting about it. And then we came to market only about a year ago. So August 1st, our pre-sale on the OVR Jump and the OVR Velocity happened. So we're new. We've since added the timing gates and everything, and it appears that we've been running it like a breakneck pace, but the reality is, like, everything, if it's like with anything else, like when you see a documentary come out, that's probably been in the works for 4 to 6 years. So, even the timing gates that just came out, the OVR Sprint, my kids at my school have been using those for 2 years. So that's number one. That's one thing, is sort of the old school manner of, like, not only are we former athletes and coaches who, and again, I'm an active coach. I define myself more as a coach than anything else. Um, but so number one, not only do we like understand that day to day sort of walk and process, like physically, what are the things that weigh on you as a coach every day? Like, what is your actual process that you got to get through every day? Thinking about like storing stuff, and how heavy is it, and how durable is it. The OVR jump is made out of anodized aluminum, and it's a solid, like, it's light. So compared to a mat, you're going to save 30 plus pounds on each one, but it's it can collapse small, it can go big, it can, like, all of these things. Instead of trying to fit your training around the device, it's the devices all complement the training. And part of that is simply we take the time to actually test the products. And that's like a very simple thing, but you can't take it for granted because not everyone does it. There's products that are out there on the market now that they might say on paper that they have a feature, but you can't actually use the feature for the thing that it's supposed to do. Um, if you have an in-beam hand start, but you can't put that start on their hand because there's no base to put the timing gate down on the ground, well, then that's a problem. If you have timing gates that don't work outside, where most people, because of space constraints, like, I don't own a facility that we can run an indoor 40 in. So if we're going to time 40s, we're outside and it's sunny in Florida. So, like, we need timing gates that work in the sun. We need jump devices that are going to withstand the massive volumes of hundreds of kids a day doing thousands of cumulative jumps on those devices. Well, the devices, they stay up really well if the athlete doesn't actually have to land on the device, and the device just uses, lasers to essentially measure you from, front and behind. There's less wear and tear on the device and more precision, and everything has to work fast. We've got screens on all of our devices. We've also got a free app. Like, nothing beats affordable, nothing beats free. And it's not that our stuff is cheap. Our VBT, we've got EAI on there, and TPV, time to peak velocity, and EAI, elastic accelerative index. We've got those things simply because, like, I'm interested in those things.
Right.
So, other people might try and say, like, hey, that's a defining feature, and that's why our price point is $1,500 a unit. To me, that's a line of code. Like, yeah, it's cool, but, like, I shouldn't gouge you because you're interested in, a slightly higher level of operation with it. Like, that doesn't affect my unit cost. So why should I gouge you on it?
Right.
Like, it's again, like, there's tons of widgets and things at Walmart that cost far less even than what our prices are, that are far more complicated. There's children's toys out there that are more complex than our stuff. And our stuff has all of the features of the stuff that's priced well above us. But so, like, if the toy industry can, like, if all these other industries can figure out a way to price their products affordably to where they can meet their customers, where their customers can actually afford to interact with it, like, why can't our industry? There's certainly, I think, enough demand. There's enough people out there. So we can make money and you can have a good experience. And we also theorize that if you have a good experience, you'll buy more. Because, like you said, like, if you have one, but you train a team, then one is none. You
Right.
might need 3 just so that you can get, hey, this semester, this year, we're buying 3. We're just going to put these 3 racks with, our more advanced kids, or we're just going to put our skills on there, or maybe we're just going to put our bigs on there, whatever. And over time, you broaden it out to, maybe after a year or 2, your whole weight room is done with that one type of device, or, maybe you station things out, whatever. But like, if you don't have, there's a lot of cool tech out there that people see and they go, oh man, I'd love to try that, but it's priced so prohibitively. And then when they finally do get it, it's fragile, it breaks, it slows down the workflow. It just, it's not done. It's not finished. It's not complete. It doesn't really work. And then
Right.
you as the consumer come away, or let's say your admin, they come away saying, we helped you get that last year. You don't even use it. And it's like, well, yeah, because I didn't know until I got it that it doesn't work right. Because again, it may have never been anticipated that it would be in a team setting. May have never anticipated that like middle schoolers were going to use it, high schoolers are going to use it. Athletes have to operate it directly. They may
Right.
have thought like, oh, a sports scientist is always going to be there to use it with the athlete. Just we try and put things into real world situations and kind of work backwards from there.
Yeah. And honestly, like again, I appreciate that, and I appreciate again going back to like how we first got started, like our initial conversation. Like I just appreciate the idea that the person that's behind the scenes, like doing all the work of, you and your two co-founding members. It's one of those things where like I appreciate the fact that like I'm actually getting to talk to one of those people because in
Mhm.
finding out why they made this, because of how it's going to help us at our level. And that's basically what we're doing. We're gonna my plan is we're gonna buy 4 this year just because that's what we can afford, and then the hope is next year we're able to get 4 more. And we only have 8 squat racks, so if I can do that, then our every squat rack in our facility is decked out. So
Mhm.
I guess my biggest thing is obviously like we're going to use it for like speed squats, deadlifts. We'll use it for the Olympic lifts, and I think, and I'm going to get to this at the end. I kind of want to do like a rapid fire off some of your tweets that I saved here at the end, but just the ones that I thought were a little more intriguing. So one
Mhm.
of the things with the Olympic lifts that I agree with is I do think there are times where a lot of coaches are probably programming them way too heavy because then they
Mhm.
kind of aren't really training the quality that we think they're training, especially with athletes that aren't as high trained. Like if you're working with Olympic level weightlifters, Olympic weightlifters, like yeah, they're going to be able to have higher velocities at like higher loads because they're so much stronger, so much more efficient and more technical with the movement versus like some 18, 19-year-old freshman wide receiver who that he's done power cleans for like 6 weeks. Like it's not the same to me. It's not even almost the same exercise sometimes. So I'm a bigger believer of like let's stay light. I'd rather stay too light on Olympic lifts than stay too heavy. Number one from a technique standpoint, but honestly just from more of the training stimulus that I'm trying to get out of it. But what I guess just specifically from the velocity based device, what are maybe some other things you mentioned the elastic strength index, you mentioned the time to peak velocity. What are some other things that you're using it for, especially not only from like the salesmanship of the
Mhm.
OBR device, but more so from you specifically in your coaching world. Like, what are you using it for? Especially work with middle schoolers, high schoolers, that you've kind of found like maybe isn't just the traditional like, all right, we're just gonna strap it on, do speed squats. Like, what are some other things that you
Yeah.
guys are doing that are maybe a little bit more unique?
Yeah, one of the the uses that I think that everyone can kind of get behind is ultimately like all of these types of devices. They're not really for the coach. They're for communicating better with the athlete. So it's like a lot of coaches go like, "Well, my coach's eye is great." And it's like, "Cool. But are you coaching every single rep on every single rack?" I'm at a school where it is often just me, or maybe it's me and like the baseball coach comes in because he has time today, and the wrestling coach comes in another day because he has time. But they are not other me's.
Right.
They are coaches who have an entire other set of things that they have to deal with. They're just trying to provide support. So having feedback at the rack that, no, as everyone knows, like it's going to drive intent. Sure. But another big thing is like, let's say I got a kid in who I've never seen before. right? Like, or it's their, maybe not that I've never seen before, but it's their first time squatting. Because I'm going to make my kids drag a sled for 3 weeks before I let them get under a bar for a back squat. But if it's their first day, let's say box squatting, um, you know, if they're a brand new kid who essentially has earned no trust with me, I might give them a minimum. Like, hey, your reps don't count unless they are 0.6 meters per second on average or higher. That's relatively snappy. So like everyone else might be told like, hey, your goal today is to fight for something that's going to be a struggle to hit at 0.5. But for this kid who's brand new, hey, your first microcycle here, your first 3 weeks while we're just learning, you literally are not allowed, you know, like if we're on a max effort day or something, you are not allowed to log any rep as successful if it is under 0.6. Because right now we're just doing like install. Because if the bar is moving fast enough, it's not 100%, but there's some assurances that like your technique is pretty good, you know, or at least that there's only so much technical breakdown that could be happening, right? It's also going to just reinforce that intent and that, you know, you have to move it fast. Like the idea that a quality rep uh, isn't just simply did you get it or not, you know? And then after 3 weeks, okay, maybe I'm going to open you up to 0.5. After 3 months, maybe you're going to open up to 0.4. You know, like when you've got young kids, this is especially helpful. And we set those sort of trust thresholds high enough that if a kid misses it, they're not, you know, like on, say, a squat where 0.3 might be around where they make or miss. So I want to keep him far away from 0.3 until I know that he can squat. I don't want to have a situation where, like, as I turn to help the next rack, this kid filters back into the scene and you know
Misses
suddenly
reps.
gets real slow. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so you know you can kind of, I like to put things in levels. So you know to give a kid those graduated sort of levels of you have to earn your trust and earn your way to eventually, like I've got a girl who box squats to a 12-inch box 351 on a safety squat bar for 2 as a high school girl. She's brutally strong and she can grind. You know, she's gone well under 0.2 on a squat. Very few, you know, very few of my athletes could hope to do that. You know, like basically she's got the, you know, her form doesn't break down. She's very mature in terms of the types of jumps that she takes. Um, like I trust her decision making so much more. So she might have no minimum, but the next kid on the rack might be at, you know, a 0.3 is the cutoff. So they hit a 0.28 and it's like, okay, yeah, you came up with it, but it doesn't count. It wasn't good enough. So you can still be working something like even a 1 rep max, but instilling that intent. Or, you know, let's say like on, you know, dynamic effort work, if you're having kids chase like a 0.6 where the goal is, you know, how much weight can you move successfully at that 0.6? And you know, as kids get you, it's great at first, right? They drive intent, they start trying to move faster. We use a lot of safety squat bars, so then all of a sudden they're chasing and they get to that point where they start to try and buck up and raise way up onto their toes and they try and hit that shrug at the top because it'll give them a higher number. And you go, well, how do you clean that up? You pair it with a second parameter. Well, now it's, you know, you can look down and say like, okay, for you, I don't want you to hit, you know, I want you to try and hit that 0.6, but with a TPV under 0.3, right? Because now they're going to understand, oh, that shrug costs me extra time. So they're like, they understand that, like, oh, on the way up from that box to standing up, I can't take the extra 2/100ths of a second to hit that shrug. So now it's, all of a sudden now you've contextualized almost like two Venn diagrams that cross, and it's like
Right.
that in between is where that good rep that you're actually chasing is, that
So,
good
so you
stimulus.
can you do that on the software? Can you set the threshold of the speed? So you're saying point 0.6 meters per second, and then the TPV is 0.3 seconds. Time to peak velocity happens within 0.3 seconds. You're able to like, or do you have to look at those metrics just independently and then just kind of tell
No,
them the threshold?
you have to look at them independently because like based on the kid's height, that'll affect the TPV,
Right.
right? And based on how fast they're going for that day, right? So, you know, that's a harder thing to just like blanket adjust across everyone. But it's something more that like when I see someone starting to raise up like that, but what that's really doing is that's really sharpening that force velocity or that rate of force development,
Right.
and you get them. All of training kind of falls into these two principal problems. You either are trying to create more force, and to create more force, you normally need more time. And then on the other side of it, you're trying to coordinate a movement faster. So you think about like, you know, jumping. You can jump so high. The higher you can jump, the faster you can jump. And
Right.
the faster you can coordinate that movement. So you go like, okay, I know how to jump 30 inches. And you go, okay, I know how to squat 500 pounds. Well, these are essentially the same movement. They require the same physical resources. And then you go, why can't I jump 30 inches with 500 pounds? You know, like, and there's reasons why there's just unavoidable reasons why you can't, but there's also that idea of like, I could coordinate that 500 pounds faster. And simply by learning to coordinate it faster, I would, by virtue of that, be stronger.
Right.
But if I could coordinate that faster, then I could also create more force within the smaller amount of time to coordinate that vertical jump, which would mean that I would jump higher too. So, you know, like by solving the extremes of sort of that equation, the lessons transfer back and forth across one another, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And you know, it's back when I was with the Rockies, we were talking about because they were big on using force plates, and we were, you know, looking at different force plate metrics. And I forget how the conversation came up, but they were talking about like strength and like whether you know the weight on the bar or something. I forget how that we actually got into the conversation, but this was back like right when I was kind of the deepest into like listening to every Westside Barbell podcast and watching all Louie's videos and reading all the books and everything. And you know, I kept thinking, I was like, we keep saying strength is weight, strength is weight, strength is weight. I was like, but don't we like? And I know Louie has that quote where he's like, strength isn't measured in weight, it's measured in time. And it's like, and if you really think about it, that's really what it is. Like the strongest athletes, yes, they produce the most force, but everything's within a time constraint, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
like your ability to strain. And you mentioned that with like that the girl that you have, you know, and her ability to strain, and like that's something I've always said is like, man, like that there's a skill in terms of straining. Like you can be really strong like in the weight room, but like being able to be a power lifter is a different type of just strain. Like that is a skill. Like the only way that you can get good at that skill is by doing like your max effort days. Like which we don't do a ton of max effort days, especially like with our athletes because we're in season. We're kind of hovering somewhere between that like 80 to 90% range. Just because
Mm-hmm.
we are most of the time we're training them in season or they got practice or whatever going on. That's kind of like our max effort day, if you will. But like there is an aspect of like if you want to hit a new 1RM, like yeah, like doing all the dynamic work, all the sub max effort work is going to help. But like there's an ability to have to learn how to strain, especially like you said, when that bar slows down, like can you still continue to grind through that rep? And I think you know, you going back to the very first thing you said, like I think that's actually a really cool way that I've never really thought about, like introducing guys and girls to not only velocity based training, but just training in general of like, hey, like you can't move, you have to move faster than this. You can't move this slow. If you move this slow, it's a bad rep. And it teaches them to number one, pick the right weight, and number
Mm-hmm.
two, like use good technique with good intent. And that's something that obviously we're big on. We're big on technique and big on intent. And I think this will be a way for us to drive up that intent. And I want to say it was a conversation I had with Coach Barrick He's out at University of Indy, and I
Mhm.
think he's a West Side guy. If you will, I don't know. That's a weird term because everybody was a West Side guy at some point. But I think he grew up in that West Side style of powerlifting, conjugate style powerlifting. Um, but I feel like it was him that we were talking to last summer on the podcast. And maybe I listen to so much shit I can't even keep track of whether it was on my podcast or some other stuff that I've listened to. But one of the coaches that I know that I've heard from, they basically do that. They do like 3 weeks where they're just teaching technique, which is like an empty bar, especially like their Olympic lifts. And then their
Mhm.
next phase is like they just want to move the bar as fast as they can. And then they start worrying about adding weight, like adding more weight. Like they'd be like empty barbell for 3 weeks, add a 45 for 3 weeks. And just once that bar gets to a certain speed, then we can start adding more weight. As opposed to most, the older way that I was always taught is like, hey, we're just going to keep adding weight because we want to, get stronger first. But I'm like, I don't know if that's,
Yeah.
yeah, we want to get strong, but I think we want to get fast first. Like, I think we want to learn how to get fast and have high bar speeds first. Like that's something that I kind of still debate on sometimes. But and then going back to my
Mhm.
Olympic weightlifting thing, like I think our athletes do a lot better job. I've been teaching a lot more snatch the last like year and a half, 2 years with our athletes, especially with our football guys. And for no other reason other than just like, I'm like, let's just try it and see how it goes. And honestly, doing snatches, in my opinion, light snatches, like I'm talking our guys, even our biggest, strongest guys are going between 95 pounds and at the most, maybe 175. Like
Mhm.
super, what I would consider still relatively light, super light, but just moving the bar really fast. That has helped our like power cleans get faster too, because it's just teaching them how to
Yeah.
be more aggressive with getting the bar moving vertically. So that's why I'm kind of excited to see once we get these. I'm excited to see kind of what our bar speeds are because I feel like we're flying, like our barbells are flying when we're doing Olympic lifts now
Yeah.
because of just trying to stay light. So I don't know if there
Yeah.
wasn't a question there, but I don't know if you have anything to kind of follow up or to add to any of that rambling that I just said.
Yeah, just in terms of Olympic lifts in general, because I don't use Olympic lifts with my athletes unless they compete in Olympic lifts. And that's always a hot button point of contention, whatever. And I come from, like it's even within the movie, like Louis did when Louis was 14 and he clean and jerked, 245. And he says, like I squatted 400 pounds. And then, you know, as a senior, basically, he clean and jerked 265. He's like, and I squatted 410 pounds. He gained considerable body weight, right? But the clean and jerk was his primary driver. That was what he was told. Like, that's the thing that you got to do. That's what people do. That's in the Olympics. And the way that Louis told stories, they're riddles. There's a whole through line that he doesn't explain explicitly. But what he was saying there was, I toiled away at Olympic lifting obsessively. And if you think about like anyone who's in the high school space, and unless you're working with very large athletes, even in the college space, you're going to see something similar. If your primary exercise, if your primary focus is like the clean, what you're going to find is that your kids hit a low 200-pound clean quickly. Like everything is going good to like 205, 225. And then it starts to slow down to a halt. And then you look around and you go, man, we had X number of freshmen who broke 200 pounds this year. This senior class is going to be incredible. And then 3 years go by and you look around and go, we got two kids over 275. What happened? We've been doing the cleans, 3-4 days a week. It was so fast in the beginning. And now just everyone's at like 245 to 255, 265. Everyone's caught in the middle. Same thing that Lou was going through. And it comes down to, you know, um, there's sort of a rule of thumb, right? Like you can only clean about 85% of what you can front squat.
Right.
And you can only front squat about 85% of what you can back squat. So you can only clean about 64% of what you can back squat. So you think about the clean that way and you go like, okay, well, if we're just cleaning for weight, right? Which is a rational, logical thing to do when you don't have a VBT device. Cleans are inherently too fast to get you strong. The bar is moving too fast to create the opportunity, the window for tension, for mechanical tension that is going to efficiently get you strong. So you can use that lift to get you strong enough to complete. Most people can very easily use that lift to get themselves strong enough to complete the lift in the low to mid 200s. But the lift itself it's not possible to do it strong enough to efficiently create the tension needed for the strength adaptation that's going to raise their absolute strength to a level that will push their squat high enough to give them the capacity to, because like if you're going off of, again, that 64%, then you've got to squat about 420 in order to have a shot based on your technique at cleaning 300, right? So if a mid 200-pound clean will never build a 400-pound squat, you've got to devote the time to getting that strong. So you can't do cleans slow enough ever to be an efficient strength stimulus, a primary strength stimulus, simply because it's in the same way that the high jump isn't going to drive up your squat because it's too fast. It just doesn't offer you a big enough window to create the tension. It can, but conversely, you can do it fast enough to be, to have higher carryover, or at least carryover for longer, as a rate of force development, as, a speed or explosiveness thing. And that's where like Randy Huntington talks about, so they start looking at their peak velocity.
Yeah.
And going, well, we definitely don't want to do anything ever that's under 2.0 meters per second. Now you can probably do a clean down around like 1.6 meters per second, but that's going to be too slow to make you faster. And it's not going to be slow enough to make you stronger. So when you start looking at it that way, you go like, well, those cleans, and the faster you are, the faster, as you get faster, that threshold needs to get higher. But for a lot of coaches, if you don't have a VBT device, especially, like how comfortable are you going to be if kids are whipping around 65 pounds on their clean as high schoolers? Football coaches aren't going to like that. They're going to go like, it looks like we're not doing anything. And it's like, and you might not be if those kids' intent isn't super high. But if you give them that VBT, and now you can get them to sort of understand, I love, like with VBT, micro loading basically, and taking small jumps of like 5 pounds from set to set, because a kid can't really, that's such a small jump that they can't definitively tell you that it feels heavier than their last set. And when you kind of get into that gray zone, you're just telling them like, just repeat the speed at which you organize that movement from last time. And a lot of times they'll get faster set to set to set, even as you're adding weight. And they start to realize, I can coordinate this movement even faster, even faster, even fast. And now all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, they might be using, a near max effort type load, but hitting it at a speed suddenly that fills a dynamic effort purpose.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's kind of like where I've kind of shifted it to, because, it ends up being somewhat that we do definitely doing like a more of a dynamic effort day, because of the fact that I do want to keep it so light. And again, we haven't measured velocity, so I can't for sure say like that we are moving as fast as what I think we're moving it. But and I listened to like 4 or 5 different podcasts that Randy Huntington was on, but I know I listened to the one that the Just Fly performance like series that he was on, and he was talking about that, and it had me thinking about that as well too, of like, the more efficient an athlete is, the faster they are, the more like, I'm going to use this word, but the more like twitchy they are, it's like, man, probably the faster they probably really need to be doing these lifts.
Yeah.
But I agree. Like, and I think anybody I don't know of anybody that's in my circle that thinks that the Olympic lifts are a great way to get them strong. Like, anybody that really would think that, to me, like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But there are people out there that do that. There are people out there that all they ever do is
there's a
Olympic
lot
lift.
of,
They only ever clean, jerk, and snap. And it's like, man, at some point, and like even if you read just literally, if you only read one Louis book ever, like go read Louis's Training the Olympic Weightlifter, Westside Style Olympic Weightlifting. I forget what the title of the book is, but I mean, like that's one of those for me. Like that was kind of an important aspect of that. Of like it still comes down to the accessory work. Like, and if you watch like the Chinese, like that's how they train. Like they're gonna clean, snatch, and jerk, but most of their other training is still accessory work. It's still gonna be back squats and front squats and heavy RDLs and good mornings and reverse hypers and leg curls and that kind of stuff. So there's still a lot of like even lunges and
Yeah.
unilateral, so
And even on the other side, there's, like, again, it's, you're still ultimately limited at the Olympic lifts, whether it's snatch, clean and jerk. They're still, even when they're done fast, they're still relatively slow.
Yeah.
And they're still, then you get into that consideration of, again, like the TPV, how much time there's the speed and the velocity that you're creating. But again, it becomes just like the shrugging on the squat of like, if you're taking 0.4 seconds to create that peak speed, like that's where as you start to integrate like TPV, because again, like with a very low level athlete, like, yeah, it all seems to transfer. And then as they get a little older, like now it's like, well, 2.0 meters per second isn't nearly fast enough anymore. Now, like they need to be 2.25. Now they need to be 2.5. And then you go, okay, now even though we're going that fast, our ground contacts are now so short, like now we need to be looking at starting from potentially like a higher start position so that we're hitting those speeds with a TPV that more closely resembles the action that we're training for. So it's even, like even when you're, and that's just one component of it. Then there's, like if you're looking at even like the training for the Olympic lifts, you have two basic problems all the time. And it's the same as what I said before. You need more force. Okay, you need to squat more, or we need to do good mornings. We need to figure out posturally, like where do you need more force? And then we need to forcibly slow you down and grind you through there in a manner that we can progress your absolute strength through those ranges. And then it's the coordination side. And it's okay, now we need to find something that is faster than a clean, right? And this is where Louis would put bands over the bar because the bar falls at a consistent speed. But that's where you get into things like, okay, well, knees to feet jumps, cleans from knees to feet. You can't do that slow. You have to be fast. You have to be violent. That has an extremely short TPV. And then you go like, well, what's even faster than like a knees to feet jump? Something that a lot of strength coaches also rag on, which would be an extreme high box squat or an extreme high box jump, right? The type of jump where your hips have to scoop up under you and your knees have to fly up into your chest, where you have that moment of pushing hard through the floor and then ripping everything up under you so that you can land under that box. And if you look from the side, it's like, what does that look like? Oh, that looks like when you land in a deep catch position from your like hips and lower, your legs, it looks like a deep catch position on top of the box.
Yeah.
And so you use the speed of that jump almost as an overspeed for the bottom of a clean or the bottom of a jerk or the bottom of a snatch rather.
Right.
But a lot of coaches would look at that and go like, oh, but that's cheating a box jump. And it's like, no, because that also mimics the quick, extension and flexion of sprinting, right? Like it's the same thing. So it's all of these exercises all have these elements that people recognize as valuable and go to bat for. And when you apply feedback like max velocity, average velocity, I don't know why people do average velocity on Olympic lifts, especially on a clean and jerk where there's multiple phases of the pull. My free advice to everyone is when you do an Olympic lift, put it in peak. Peak is your friend on an Olympic lift. I love to go peak, TPV, EAI to contextualize my Olympic lifts, or just any kind of really fast dynamic effort. And even deadlifts, because average, especially in my setting, dealing with kids who might be small, and we do a lot of sumos, so the range of motion average doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a lot of my kids. So we just look at peak. Um, but when you start to look at all that and you go like, now I'm not just choosing a clean, or I'm not just choosing a snatch. Now I'm choosing my start position to tweak it just a little more to solve a slightly different problem. I'm using a jump variation in a slightly different way so that it transfers, just like so that everything transfers to just a slightly more specific parameter that's going to make that exercise a better lesson and have better dynamic correspondence to the thing that you want. And it's
Right.
still general, like in the skin,
Right.
general and specific those are all abstracts. In the end, they don't really mean anything. It's
Yeah.
all about how the athlete can connect it.
No, that makes total sense. I do want to get to these rapid fire. They're not rapid fire, but I want to hit them a little quicker. But I forgot I wanted to mention this, and you just kind of brought it up, so I do want to touch on it again.
Mhm.
The I have elastic strength index, but you guys calling it something else? The eccentric or elastic acceleration. What is the term that you guys
Yeah,
are using?
it's the elastic accelerative index,
And what is define that? And
EAI.
what is the way that you guys are utilizing that for with OVR?
So essentially, it's similar to the concept of like RSI with jumping,
Right.
where it's just sort of assigning a score or a range where bigger means that you had a higher output relative to the time needed to create that output. So it's the same deal. It's just you're setting it up on a barbell,
So
right? So it's
what's the equation for it?
the equation is your peak velocity in meters per second divided by your time to peak
Yeah,
velocity.
that makes sense.
So
Yep.
yeah, so just like RSI, where oh, you jumped 36 inches. It's a good jump on an OVR. That's a phenomenal jump for basically anyone. That's the equivalent of a 40 on many other devices. But let's say that it took you zero point 0.5 seconds to get there. You're a force dominant, quad dominant athlete. You had to really throw yourself down, get a huge counter movement, and then your teammate gets, a, a 35, but it takes him zero point 0.2 seconds to get there.
Right.
He just kind of dips a little at the hips and is super elastic and hamstring dominant, and he flies up. One of you is going to get to access, the guy who takes 0.2 is going to get to access that quality commonly within sports, and the
Right.
other guy is going to be limited because it takes him sort of so much time to load up that attribute. The elastic accelerative index is the same way. So, you know, you can hit a really high peak velocity. You get the bar moving fast, but it takes you a while to ramp up, right? And so this is where you could look at, like, say, a snatch from the ground, like, okay, you hit a good high peak velocity, but it might have taken you 0.7 seconds to get there. So do you really get full transference and full benefit of that peak velocity? Because it took you a time constraint that isn't very,
Realistic. Yeah.
transferable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
transferable. Yeah.
So, to compare, uh, because it's divided by your time to peak, and your time to peak is generally it's under a second. So, like the time parameter is so important in terms of the scaling of that EAI. And that's something that, like, so few people with all of this stuff, like, there's more people, I think, who've bought VBT in the last 2 years than probably every year before that, like, combined, like,
Yeah.
cumulatively. So it's, we're all reading literature that was written from, like, these very small studies and these very limited means. where it was like we're reading the thoughts of a few people who only worked with a few people who tested for a short period of time on a few people, and we're extrapolating that on down the road as though it is, like law. And the reality is we're in such an infancy of all this stuff because it's all brand new tools to people. There's going to be probably, I would estimate that there's going to be 10,000, or more facilities that get VBT next year that have never had it before.
Right.
That means, 10,000 minds who are going to have that chance to look at it. And certainly a lot of those people, even if they don't have the alphabet behind their name and they don't have, the accreditations and they're not at the right school with the right logo on their polo, like there's a whole lot of smart people out there who just haven't had the means to get into the game. And we're going to start seeing, as those smart people get tools and new strategies, new methods, new means come out of that. There's going to be good, there's going to be bad. But the value of the good is going to eventually overshadow, and the whatever works is going to, continue to sort of work its way across the market until the standards that are used become much more plentiful.
Yeah. And then that's the thing is like, you, you made me think whenever I, take our interns through their coursework, we start talking about like strength and power adaptations and all that stuff. And it's like most of the research out there with strength and power adaptations, they're literally looking at like a 8 to 12, maybe up to like a 16-week training window. And it's like, okay, yeah, but then what happens? What happens to your research after that 16 weeks? Like what do you want to do your linear progression for 16 weeks? That's fine. But then what do I do after that 16 weeks? That's basically like a one semester. What do I do with my athletes after that one semester?
Yeah.
Like, so I'm gonna screen share here for a second because I want to switch over to. I don't have a Twitter, but when I was kind of like looking up some stuff that I wanted to ask you,
All right.
These are the questions that I kind of highlighted from your Twitter account that I wanted to touch on. You guys, I don't know if you guys can see my screen. Hopefully you can, but hopefully it's on there.
Yeah.
So I love the first one. Actually, I love all of these, but the first one to me was the first one that I kind of saw that stood out. And I was actually telling somebody at my jiu-jitsu gym this the other day. We were talking about this, and I was like, man, like I think I was actually talking to one of my good buddies that's a strength coach here in town, Ryan, and one of the other guys that kind of works as a strength coach now too, that we all train together. But I love this one. If conditioning made you tough, we'd all be afraid to see a cross-country runner in the dark. And it's like, man, you want to talk about like football coaches. They love making their guys that they want them to be fast on Saturdays, but they want to treat them like cross-country runners on Monday through Friday. So we don't need to there's not really a follow-up to that, but I just want to kind of put these on here and you can kind of interject whenever you want. And then this is the same deal. Like, and I definitely like get your thoughts on this, especially you working with like middle school and high school kids. I mean, like, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know when this became a thing where like making kids, I don't know if it's because of like the Rocky movies. Like you mentioned that back earlier, like the 80s movies where like Rocky's training and he's working so hard and he's bleeding and dying and drinking raw egg yolks and all that stuff. Like, I don't know where that became a thing, but I mean, is that something that you still battle like with the kids that you coach where their parents are like, well, and the coach is like, well, you're not working them hard enough because they're actually walking out of here laughing and with smiles on their faces and like they must not have worked hard enough today. Like, is that something that you still deal with?
Oh yeah. It's something that number one, so all of this, like I jump our kids a ton, right? So if a kid pukes, I'm going to see it in his jumps for probably 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, his performance is going to be down, right? So, if I know what hurts the kids, the things that I do hurt the kids, human nature is I'm going to stop hurting the kids because when I make the kids worse, they're not going to make me look good if they're in worse shape.
Right.
So that's likewise like all the conditioning stuff and whatnot. Like I worked with a volleyball team where I could tell days in which they ran. Their coach would do conditioning and stuff, and she had won five state title rings before we started working together when I was new to her school. And the girls would, they would all jump about 3.5 inches lower one day to the next. And I go like, wow, the whole team jumped low. So I'd stop and go, what did y'all do? What happened? And they'd all say, coach made us run, 2 miles yesterday. And then we did suicides. And, it's a volleyball team. Like, it's valuable for them if they can jump high. And the coach is doing something that actively makes them jump significantly lower, over 10% lower. So this is making her team less competitive. And she's not doing it because she's trying to be a jerk. She's doing it because it's what she thinks works. So a week or so later, the coach comes to me and says, like, hey, what are some things, she's like, I like what we're doing. I can see the girls are jumping higher. But I kind of pointed out to her, like, yeah, all the girls are jumping lower today. She's like, why? And I said, like, I don't know. What did you do yesterday? And she said all the running and stuff. And I said, well, like, might I just suggest that you pull back some of that volume, or, cut that in half, or split up, like, because number one, your girls used to not work out hard. They used to not be in the gym hard. So we are spending a lot more of their calories. We're spending a lot more of the resources that they have. And, you need to keep that in mind. And I said, and number two, we can see together, like, if their jumps are going up, then you and I are both doing something good. And if their jumps are going up, like, you're going to see it out on the court. And she's like, I already have, like, they look great. And I said, yeah, but what we're doing right now is still, lightweight compared to what we could be doing. And she's like, well, I want them to be conditioned. And I said, well, here's the thing about conditioning. It's task specific. So I want them in the condition of hyper athletic girls who dominate on the volleyball court. And she's like, okay, I think I can understand that. And I said, we talked about some of the athletes who had come by before. And I said, like, think about that girl who you had, who just graduated, like, think about what she looked like. I want to give you athletes that look like her condition. Now, her genetics, she basically could overcome. She was so resilient, she could overcome everything that they were doing. So she had a six pack, she was muscular without working out, and, while running cross country type volumes. And I said, but your other girls, like, you run them so much, and look at them. Like, they're not as lean. They're not very bouncy. I said, it's because you're giving the body conflicting stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, like, this isn't about trying to say that you're doing anything wrong. This is about trying to highlight areas where we can get better. And she said, coach, she held up her hand. And I thought she was going to say something, like, I have 5 rings, blah, blah, blah. And she said, coach, you don't get this because you're scared to change. And she said, every one of these fingers happened because I made a change. And she said, I'll do whatever it takes to get to that second hand. And so we stopped all conditioning, basically. And I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do lots of sleds. We're going to do lots of belted marching, and we're going to do sprints. But the sprints, everything is going to start very low. And when the girls can finish their workout earlier, like, every time they finish their workout a couple minutes earlier, we're just going to add in, like, another rep, another round of sleds. And I said, and very purposefully, we want to keep this to where they don't realize that we're increasing their volume. And I said, because we have our whole off season. And by the end of the off season, these girls were all super lean. They were running less than ever, and yet they were all lean. They were muscular. They're all talking about, showing their abs and whatnot. And I was like, that's because they're sprinting. And they might only be doing like 4 sprints over the course of an hour, but they're sprinting. And, like, just driving your legs up like that makes your abs so strong. It's such a severe stimulus that when that's all you give your body and then you stay out of the way, body adapts really fast. And sure enough, they had 2 great seasons after that where they advanced further and further. And basically every senior girl, either, we had at one point 10 or 4 girls who could simultaneously jump over, touch over 10 feet. We had girls who were told, 1 year I had a girl crying, breaking down that, some scout told her, you'll never play college ball. And then a year later, she's signing D1. Like huge transformations. And the girls were happy about it. And the coach was happy because she's like, these girls love coming to practice now. It like they don't resent me as much. They don't resent the working out as much. Everyone is having a better, like, as the coach, she was like, I'm having a better time because they're having a better time. And it's hard because it does put a lot more onus on the coach to communicate everything else effectively. But I think that in general, like, people get caught up in, like, Max Schmarzo had a great quote about this years ago where he said, hard work is lazy. A lot of times coaches want to work hard. Kids want to, hashtag grind. Um, Not because it's effective, but because when they actually kind of get to the failure that they fear is ultimately coming, they can say, well, I did everything I could. It's a
Yeah.
lot harder. It is a lot tougher to look into the mirror and say, the onus is on me as the adult to take the responsibility and make the changes that will do right by these kids. This 14-year-old, he has no clue what is right for him. This parent who's never had a kid try and make it to college, they have no clue what is right. I'm supposed to be the one who has that plan, who has that inkling, that understanding. And so if my kid's not going in the right direction, that's my fault. My job within the system is to keep them moving forward. And not every kid moves forward all the time. And when they don't, I'm supposed to be the one to say, like, all right, it's incumbent upon me to figure it out. Likewise, we all have this, we all want to watch like 300 and have this moment where we pretend that, like, we're military generals or something, and like, just like sports in general, that like, we're truly makers of men and everything. And it's like, the reality is that it's hard to show up and just simply be disciplined and be a good example every day. It's hard because you can't fake it. You have to keep doing it. It's hard to work with a whole bunch of athletes or young people and not lose your temper, right? Like, it's hard to be the more mature person in the room. It's hard to have no ego. It's hard to have a kid, disrespect you and just have it be water off your back. But ultimately, like, that is the toughness and the resiliency that you want those kids to emulate when you talk about, like, making kids tough, being a maker of men. When I was in high school, I got diagnosed with cancer. I did not have cancer, but for 6 or so weeks, all of my doctors scared the crap out of me that I was going to die. After that, the utter absurdity of, like, a coach getting in my face and yelling at me on a football field. I mean, like, I couldn't take anything else seriously after that. It's like there was just a sudden juxtaposition. And now, like, as a coach, like, I see 12-year-olds who have gray hair. And like, like, I know that that's because they go home to legitimate stress.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of, even beyond that, a lot of the concepts of, like, what we traditionally kind of look at and go, like, almost almost like, in a sort of, like, to use, like, Remember the Titans in a way, like Gary Bertier, he was, all the coaches, he's so tough. And you go, yeah, but every black kid on that team left that facility and went out into a life that was a million times tougher, right? Like, you're wanting them to treat the game as though it's a life and death thing when they actually deal with life and death outside of it. It's a game at the end of the day. When I'm in the grocery store at Publix, our local grocery, like, no one cares what my record was. No one cares if, my kids won something or got a ring or got a trophy. None of that ultimately matters. Like, first and foremost, it's the experience and the service of helping people. And then beyond that, it's secondary from there of like, that's the absolute requisite. Like, you have to provide a good experience. Then beyond that, does that experience have like actual efficacy and, utility towards some sort of ends? And a lot of coaches, it's almost like they coach because they, don't want to go to therapy. Like, they want to perpetuate and be on the powerful side of almost like trauma that they've experienced their whole life. And it's just like, I don't think they're, I don't think they're like conscious of it really, that like, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, eh, things are only, again, once you've been told that you're dying, like as a kid, like, you don't look at tough the same way anymore.
Yeah.
Like, things are only, if you call something tough, it is tough. I never want to tell my kids that anything is tough. I want to tell them that everything is easy so that they expect that they should succeed. Because when you expect that you should succeed, you do more often than not. When you're told that everything is tough, you don't come out the other end thinking like, oh, wow, look at all that I accomplished. You come out the other end having come up short more times than you should have and going, well, it's okay because it was tough. And it's like, no, like, so much of childhood is going to be tough that we don't need to give them more tough. And also, so much of childhood is not tough. And we don't need to tell them that easy things are tough just so that they can, so that we can like feel like we led some troops into battle.
Yeah. I mean, that's really true. And like, there's definitely parts of that where like, and I feel like I've definitely gotten better at this over my career for sure, of where like just going out of your way to be, not going out of your way, but just being mean for the sake of being mean, like, because you're trying to get your freshman football player to all listen to you. And it's like,
Yeah.
how about you just make the environment more enjoyable for them to want to listen to you versus like having to force them to listen to you. So I think that's definitely a huge aspect for sure. And I think I
Yeah.
personally think you're starting to see a little bit of a shift with that. I mean, just the coaches that I know,
Hmm.
even the college like football, like the D1 Power 5 college football coaches and stuff that are kind of in my network, like are really realizing that, especially with, and again, I hate to say it like this because it's, this generation, everybody kind of says that, but it's like, I don't know if any generation of kids ever wanted to be like screamed at in their face. Like I think there's a way to like coach kids and hold them to high standards and do all that. And like, that's the way that I would want to be coached. That's the way that, I would want my daughter to be coached. But I don't think you
Hmm.
need to be like, again, and I've definitely made a mistake. Like, I don't think you need to be in someone's face, like cussing them out. And again, I've done that. And I don't think it's
Yeah.
like necessarily the way to do it for sure. But it's definitely very intriguing. I think kind of like summarize all that. It's one of those where like, I think part of it's just because of, that's just how, it's one of those where like people do it because that's just how people before them did it. And they just have to feel like they just have to do the same way. Like, and I'm just like, I don't know if
Yeah.
that's and then it goes back to being the same thing with like with the volleyball coach that you were saying about, like, her willing to just change because that's how she's gotten 5 rings. Like, that's an extremely important thing. Like, I think football coaches, basketball coaches, baseball coaches, like, they're running practices right now the same way that they ran practices, that their coach ran practices when they were in college, and that their coach, it's become this thing where like, I love the game of football. I love the game of baseball. I love the game of basketball. Like, I wrestled. I love wrestling. But man, some of that shit, the practices are just boring. Like, why don't the coaches, the weight room sometimes can be so boring and so mundane that as coaches, we should probably try to make it a little bit more exciting and like want the athletes. You mentioned about the kids coming out smiling and happy, and the coach saying like, man, the practices are even better. Practices are more fun for me as the coach. Like, well, yeah, like, don't you think that if you're having fun at practice, that the players are probably also going to have fun, which means you're probably going to be more productive? So I think there's a whole like psychological aspect of that we're probably, just as a community, probably just scratching the surface on, in terms of like, yeah, we do still want kids to get fired up, and we do want some kids need to bang their head off the wall before they go squat. But honestly, I found that most kids don't necessarily need to be like that, especially the like female athletes, younger athletes. Like, they don't need to be banging their head off the wall. That's like a, you know, I don't know what you want to call it. It's like a learned behavior to an extent, in my opinion. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know. I
Oh
say that,
yeah.
but when you watch, when you watch something like Westside guys, like, that's how they are. But it's also like, yeah, but there's the ability to do that because of you have to strain and you have to teach yourself to be like that. Like, that's not something that I don't think most kids, like most humans, naturally want to yell and scream and bang their head off the wall and like somebody slap them across the face. Like that's something that like they were, to an extent, they were probably taught that in some form. And again, that's not me. Like I don't like doing that.
Yeah.
I don't want to get slapped in the face. I don't want to have to slap somebody in the face to get them to squat heavy. Like that's not me. So I think there's some people that need that at times, I guess, but I don't think most people need that.
Yeah, there's a heavy like performative element both with the athletes and with coaches. Like those archetypes of what we sort of traditionally have come to think of coaches as, you know, like the best coaches that I know, especially on the weight side. Or like I know some track coaches who are incredible. Um, they're very quiet. They just have like they encourage their athletes and they goof around with them. Um, they rarely, you know, like they rarely have to raise their voice. I had to raise my voice yesterday and I did not like it. And I had to do something where, you know, like no one within that room will ever forget, you know, like it was a safety issue. So I
Right.
made a
Right.
big point and, you know, I told a kid like, you know, who wasn't basically paying attention to safety. I said, you know, like ultimately it wasn't like, you know, go do push-ups or go do whatever. It was, you know, like, are you understanding the gravity of this situation? You're not. Okay, well, I'm not here to perpetuate like some sort of, you know, we're not going to have a thing where you go like, you know, oh, Coach Fahey's so mean to me. It's going to be just leave the
Right.
weight room, you know, like come back to like, you're going to remember that this happened. You're going to go sit out by the locker room and wait. There's not going to chew you out. Not going to just, if you don't care to be here, don't come. I go so far as I tell all of my coaches, you know, like in here in Florida, like in the off season, there's no mandatory, you know, like from the FHSAA side, it's like nothing is mandatory. You know, these are all voluntary workouts. I love that rule. I extended into the season. I'm like, your team might be scheduled for the weight room, but like, if you don't want to be here, leave. If you
Yeah.
don't care, don't come. I don't want you here unless you want to be here. Because ultimately, if you don't believe in investing into yourself, then you are taking up space at the rack and you're taking up resources away from other kids. So if you're not into it, leave.
Yeah.
And, you know, I find that
That's something
very
that
few kids leave.
Yeah, and that's something that I feel like I got a lot better at Fairmont, but that's something that I've struggled with too because like the coaches want us to take attendance, and my thing with that is like, hey, they're your athletes. Like I just want the kid. I
Yeah.
only want to worry about the kids that want to show up and want to work hard. Like if they don't
Yeah.
want to show
Oh,
up, they don't want to work
I
hard.
take the attendance.
Like I
I
don't
take
want to
the
take attendance for
attendance,
them.
but
Yeah,
I don't do, you know, anything punitive after that. I'm like, yo, you know, if this was Planet Fitness and you were 20 years old, you would probably be begging me to give you a workout, a structured workout. And you'd
right.
probably be, you know, like, oh man, can you please? I can't afford it. I'm like, guys, you don't understand. Y'all can't afford me. You know, like, and a
That's a
lot of
good
y'all
point
are
too.
going to,
Yeah,
yeah, a lot of y'all are going to reach out to me after this is over and say, hey, coach, you know, I'm in my first semester. I've got, you know, the college gym or whatever. Like, what's something I can do? And I'm going to say, just keep doing the same workout that we were doing. You
it's
know,
funny you
like,
say that. It's funny you say that because I actually had a girl, one of our female athletes. I don't know if she'll probably never watch this, but I don't want to even say the sport because I
yeah,
don't want to single her out. But she reached out to me yesterday and was like, sent me a message. We use Train Heroic, and she sent me a message on Train Heroic saying like, hey, we have our big conditioning test coming up with our basketball for the I just said it for the basketball team for the women's basketball team, and she was like, and I'm starting to freak out about it, and I'm like, I've been putting like as much as I don't love conditioning, like I do want to make sure that you're prepared for what the team's going to ask you to do. Which again, like I think for a sport like basketball, you do have to be in shape, and I like the idea that our coaches want to do some sort of conditioning test because it should at least hold the girls and guys accountable throughout the summer to actually do something. But again, like it to
hmm
an extent, it should be voluntary. But don't come to me a month before the semester starts, panicking because you haven't done anything when I've provided you stuff for free to do that. If you were going to go to any other like place out there and pay for it, you're going to be paying $150 to $200+ a month for like private facility training that we're giving you completely for free, 5 days a week of training
Right.
for free. So, well, Coach, man, I got so many more questions. We'll definitely have to do a follow up. I do want to wrap up. I just want to put this on the screen here. So this is your podcast, Burn the Ladders. I'm assuming that's like something with speed ladders. I'm assuming that's an anti-speed ladders. Is that what that Burn the Ladders is for?
Yeah. I used to wear a shirt when I would coach that had a flaming speed ladder and someone going through it.
I see it now. I see it right now, actually.
Yeah. So that's also like on social media. That's my Instagram and Twitter. I have both at Westside Film and at Burn the Ladders. I'm much more active on Burn the Ladders, even though Westside Film has, yeah. So, yeah, that just again, it's sort of like a rejection of both gimmicks and things that people do out of like tradition and ritual without, while losing that connection of why did they ever do it in the first place. There are great reasons to use ladders. Everyone has to get in and out of tree houses every now and then. But I actually have the biggest ladders you like in terms of like things that you lay down on the ground and, do in this case, actual speed with. I have the largest ladders of anyone. But you would never mistake them for what everyone else uses. But yeah, it's that just like, rejection of like, I don't do anything just simply because it's what everyone has done. It's, like if I can't identify the purpose of it and I can't communicate it to you, then I don't want to spend the calories. I don't want to spend the fatigue. I don't want to spend the recovery on it. That's kind of, like when you, especially the last couple of years, have been big about simultaneously, I want to drive up our density and our volumes in order to build, work capacity. I'm huge on work capacity, but I want to spend those resources, like responsibly. So I want to, I want to get, it's like if I was buying dinner, I want to buy as much steak as possible. And I don't want to load my plate up with bread, like, and end up with a huge bill at the end of the night. Like if I'm going to get charged, we're putting something valuable on the plate and we're walking out satisfied.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Coach, it's been great chatting with you. And like I said, I appreciate that first conversation that we had, and looking forward to getting your guys' velocity-based devices and hopefully even more in the future. And I'll definitely keep you in the loop on how we're using them and any questions that I have, and kind of just progress how we're kind of progressing with them. But I'm going to put all that content in terms of like how people can get a hold of you, and I'm going to kind of try to catch up and watch some of the Spotify. I need to actually start trying to figure out a way to get my stuff on Spotify. I haven't really dove into that. I'm as you can tell, I'm very minimally production value here on my end. But I appreciate your time. And
no problem.
I'm going to pass this on and share it on social media. Do you have an Instagram account as well?
Yeah, just Burn the Ladders. Burn the Ladders on Twitter. Burn the Ladders on Instagram.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make sure I tag you in that, and then we'll kind of spread the word. And like I said, looking forward to following up with some of your content as well as I continue. I watch so much stuff. Like I got a log jam about 20 YouTube videos that I'm trying to watch in the next couple of days. So appreciate your time. Good chatting with you. And from an FSU up in West Virginia, it's good to connect with you.
Yeah.
I guess you guys are the OGs FSU. You guys are the OGs FSU. So we'll be little brothers up here in West Virginia, but appreciate it.
All right. You're welcome to the family anyway.
Have a good one, man. Thank you.
All right. See you.